On today's episode of Inside the Mavs, I had to go behind enemy lines to get you ready for Game 1 of the NBA Finals between your Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics. Celtics Insider Marc D'Amico joining me here on the show today on Inside the Mavs. Welcome to Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining me here for the latest episode of Inside the Mavs. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video as well. Getting you ready for Game 1 of the NBA Finals between your Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics. Of course, the Mavericks taking out the Timberwolves in 5 games. The Boston Celtics dispatching of the Indiana Pacers in a clean sweep to make their 23rd Finals appearance, looking for their 18th championship. And today we go behind enemy lines with Celtics Insider and host of the View from the Rafters podcast, Marc D'Amico, joining me here on Inside the Mavs. Marc, what's going on?
What's up, Kevin, man? About to hit a busy week. And I got to say that intro that you've got for this podcast is pretty fire. That got me revved up going into this. So nicely done.
I appreciate that. It's trying to get this all together as we get ready for the finals and throughout the course of the season. It's a labor of love. So I appreciate the compliment there for sure.
Oh, looks great.
Yeah, and it's for this series, Marc. I want to start here with Boston because, as I was kind of, getting through some of the numbers and thinking about this series itself, for you guys, the math is the name of the game for the Celtics when it comes to the three-point line. Number 1 3-point shooting team in terms of field goals per game at 16.5. Number 2 in three-point percentage, nearly 39%. When did this all kind of change for Boston in terms of becoming this kind of devastatingly good three-point shooting team for Joe Mazzulla's club?
Well, I think the answer to that question, Kevin, is twofold, right? Like, number one, it's when Joe Mazzulla took over as head coach of the Boston Celtics, and he is a math guy, and that's the way that he thinks about it. Of, if you win the math battle, the math in the end, which is the scoreboard, right? We're all playing for a mathematical equation at the end of every single game, which is scoring more points than the other team. When he took over, he's been looking at it from that perspective of how do we score more points than the opposing team more often than not. And the three-point line has been an integral part of that from his approach. And so that's the first part, is when he took over as head coach before last season, and he implemented and it's not like the Celtics weren't taking a bunch of threes before that, but it even went up from there. The emphasis on taking as many three-pointers as possible when they are good shots. So that's stage number 1. And then the second stage to it is when Brad Stevens built this team, right? And there were a couple moves that were made during the offseason of bringing in Jrue Holiday, of bringing in Kristaps Porzingis, of 2 different guys who are added to the team who are both very good three-point shooters. And I'm not sure what the numbers were at the end of the season, but I know Jrue Holiday was leading the entire league in corner three-point percentage for almost the entire season. And again, I don't know where it wound up. I would bet that he probably finished at the top at the end of the season as well, but he was excellent from the corners, which is where he got a bunch of his three-point shots. Kristaps Porzingis is a 35 to 38% shooter from three-point range, and he bounced back from a cold month during the season. So his numbers at the end of the season weren't necessarily indicative of what he did for the majority of the season. So when you add 2 guys like that to a team that already has a ton of other talent in Tatum, Brown, and Horford, Derek White, like, you've got so much talent around that perimeter. When other players can take the ball off the dribble, you're going to generate those shots. So stage 1 was Joe Mazzulla taking over and emphasizing the three-point line. And stage 2 was Brad Stevens building a team that's even deeper and has more skill from the perimeter than what the Celtics have had in the past. And I can't forget Sam Hauser either and Peyton Pritchard. Those are 2 great three-point shooters who come off the bench for the Celtics. So it's literally like 1 to 8 or 9 of like the top guys in the rotation. All of them can shoot threes.
Yeah, and this team has been devastatingly good at it throughout the course of this regular season. I think for a lot of folks who are getting themselves introduced to what this team has done from specifics, this team has been able to shoot well from the three-point line. And, you know, with the 5 out that you guys are able to play, especially with Kristaps Porzingis in the lineup, how does he change the dynamic for Boston when he's healthy and in the lineup based off of what you guys are asking him to do as part of this team in this rotation here?
Yeah, so Brad Stevens went out and got Kristaps Porzingis for this situation, like specifically for the playoffs, because as the Celtics navigated the past couple of playoff runs, like obviously one ended in the NBA Finals against Golden State, another ended last season in the Eastern Conference Finals against Miami. But as the Celtics navigated series to series in those seasons and in past seasons, what they began to realize and what they did realize in hindsight was other teams were able to defend them in a specific way that they could not overcome because they didn't have that one player who could unlock the offense. And that player is a guy that you can toss the ball into the post and say, if you're going to switch defensively on us, okay, put your 6'4" guard on our 7'2" center, and he's going to go score on the block on them.
Sure.
So that is the reason why Brad Stevens, and we all know, you go back to draft night, we all saw the rumors, and first it was this trade, then we didn't know if it was happening, then it wound up being this trade. Well, Brad Stevens really was working to find out any way that he could get Kristaps Porzingis, and that's why, is for this particular situation. So when he does get back into the lineup, we hope that that does happen in the finals. And I hope both teams are at full health, by the way. That's the only way you want the NBA finals to be played. But we hope that Kristaps Porzingis is back in the lineup. And the reason is because it's going to put Dallas's defense into a bit of a bind. And Dallas has been excellent on defense since they made the trades at the deadline. But still, this adds that one element. We've been saying in Boston all season that Kristaps Porzingis unlocks Boston's offense. That's because, yes, he can shoot from three-point range, but it's that post presence that he has. And he's one of the best post players, if not the best post player in the NBA this season in terms of points per possession. So when you've got that guy and you've got dynamic players on the perimeter like Brown and Tatum and Holiday and White, most teams would love to be able to switch 1 through 5 and be able to defend the Celtics in that fashion. But when you throw this guy, a 7'2", 7'3" big man who can shoot over basically any defender in the league, and when he gets mismatches, when other teams start switching, that is what unlocks the offense. And that's why Boston had the best offense in the history of the NBA this season.
Yeah, and Porzingis not only on the offensive end, really good on the defensive end in terms of his rim protection and shot block. We came to find out a little bit about that in Dallas when he was here, you know, for the time that he was. And, you know, for them and for Porzingis, been out since late April, since with that calf injury. How are the team feeling about his health and his progression? As you mentioned, hopefully getting him back for game 1. Do you guys feel like he's on track to be able to start this series, or when would that potentially be for him?
Yeah, so nothing has been released publicly to this point saying, like, yes, this is happening. But I would say that at this point, as we sit here on Monday morning, all signs are pointing to that happening. And the reason I say that is because the Celtics had practice on Saturday. Kristaps Porzingis was a full participant in that practice, as I posted on X, as Joe Mazzulla revealed. Now, that being said, that practice Joe Mazzulla termed as moderate. So there wasn't like high intensity or anything like that. My assumption is that they were kind of installing offensive and defensive philosophies for what they want to do against Dallas in particular. Now, what Joe Mazzulla did say is that yesterday, was going to be a much more intense practice session. Media was not allowed at that practice session. The Celtics had media the prior couple of days, so media was not there to ask questions and get answers. But I haven't heard anything saying that Porzingis wasn't able to go through that, or that he suffered any setbacks or anything like that. So, based upon what we're hearing, I'm adding 2 + 2, hopefully equals 4 here. That Porzingis will be out there for the start of the series. And by the way, we all saw the reports from Woj during the Eastern Conference Finals. It sounded like he was indicating that the Celtics were going to try to get Kristaps Porzingis back for game 4 or 5 or something around there. Obviously, the Celtics took care of business. They were up 3-0. They probably felt, we don't need to rush it. Let's get him some extra time. And then as they finished off that sweep of the Pacers, they got 9 extra days to get Kristaps Porzingis back and ramping up, do a little bit more intense practice before game 1. So I think all signs are pointing toward him being ready to go, but we shall see what the official information is. Tomorrow is probably when we're going to find out at Celtics practice.
Makes sense. Yeah, those calf injuries can be tricky. So you have to be careful with being
calves
able to
and hamstrings, right?
Yes. We saw how Milwaukee was affected, of course, with Giannis and his calf injury, unfortunately, not being able to really play in the postseason. Yep. Before we get to some of the deeper storylines, particularly, of course, with Kyrie Irving, I'm struck with Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Jayson Tatum, first team All-NBA selection. You guys back in the finals for the second time in the last 3 years. Jaylen Brown, Eastern Conference Finals MVP. We're talking about 2 of the more dynamic players in this league for Boston. And for those 2 specifically, what does this series mean for them and how they're approaching this matchup with Dallas, given the amount of success that they've had, but ultimately not being able to win a championship at this point?
Yeah, I think it means everything, right? Like, I remember sitting in the press conference room a couple seasons ago when they finally punched their way through to get to the NBA Finals. And it felt like this huge relief was off their shoulders because both of them had been to the conference finals. I think it was like 4 times, each of them at that point. It might have been 3 or 4. And they just hadn't been able to punch their way through. They finally punched their way through. Then obviously, as we all know, they wind up falling to the Golden State Warriors. Well, now, 2 seasons later, after they failed to get to the finals last season, now they're there again. So now, as opposed to what it was a couple seasons ago of punching through to get to the finals, now it's trying to punch through and win the finals. So yeah. I think it means everything to these guys, and they've been approaching it that way. It stung them when they lost that series against Golden State a couple seasons ago. They were up 2-1. They felt like, all right, this is our opportunity, and they let it slip away, right? They obviously could have played better, made better decisions and all that stuff, and I think that really ate at them inside. Then they come back last year and fall down 3-0 to Miami. And we all know how that wound up in Game 7 after Tatum rolled his ankle right at the start of the game. But those 2 seasons have been eating these guys alive. And what they want more than anything, and you've seen it through the way that they played this season, there is no selfishness. It's total, complete. We want what's best for the team. I'm not trying to score 35 a night. I don't care. It's all about team success. That's how the team won 64 games. That's all they care about, is winning the championship. And Jaylen Brown's been saying it too when he didn't get chosen to the All-NBA team, which I would argue that he should have been on one of those teams. He was awesome all season long, better than last season when he did make the All-NBA team. But he said, I don't really care. All I care about is winning the championship. So that's goal number 1 for both of these guys, is trying to get that chip this season.
Yeah, and they played like it. This team was a juggernaut all year. You can go through all the numbers when it comes to offensive rating, defensive rating. We talked about 3-point percentage and 3-point field goal made per game. This team was clicking on all cylinders, led by those couple of guys throughout the course of this season. Let's take a quick break here on Inside the Mavs. More with Marc D'Amico, Celtics Insider, getting you ready for Game 1 and this series between the Mavericks and the Celtics. We'll touch on Kyrie because, that's a thing that we've got to talk about too. But before we get there, let's hear from today's sponsor, our video and our podcast. Let's hear it from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family, so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs. Thank you so much for hanging out with us through that spot. And thank you to today's sponsor, our video and our podcast in Aura with Celtics Insider Marc D'Amico here on Inside the Mavs, getting you ready for game one between the Mavericks and the Celtics on Thursday night. And of course, Mark, one of the overarching storylines in this series is the fact that Kyrie Irving, who is, of course, with the Mavericks now back in the NBA Finals for the 4th time in his career, is coming back to Boston, where, of course, was there. Things didn't end the way that I'm sure Celtics fans and Kyrie wanted to have them end there in Boston. But at the same time, I'm sure a lot of Celtics fans are ready to, quote unquote, welcome Kyrie back in terms of this finals. What has been the conversation there about Kyrie Irving's return to Boston and ultimately how this will play out, they believe, based off of not only their team, but what Kyrie Irving brings to the Mavericks now?
Yeah, I got to be honest. So living in Boston, I've been here for 15 plus years. I haven't heard a whole lot about Kyrie Irving heading into this series. I mean, there's been obviously national talk and everyone wants to talk about it, but I haven't heard a lot of chirping around the city. You know, I'm walking down the street wearing Celtics gears. People are just saying, Celtics are going to win this. This is their year. No one has said anything about Kyrie. And I think that's a great thing. I do know for a fact he's going to get booed when he comes back, right? Like we all know that. So is Luka. So is everyone else. Kyrie's probably going to be at a different level simply because of the storylines that surround him and the Celtics and that relationship and whatnot. But I think that there's been enough time where Celtics Nation and New England in general, I think, have healed a little bit. I think Kyrie has probably healed a little bit. And I thought it was great of him. He got asked that question. I think it was the walk-off interview after Game 7 where he acknowledged it, right? Like he was not in a great place during the final season that he was here in Boston. He was dealing with some stuff off the court with his family and whatnot. And that wound up impacting his decision. And he's allowed to make whatever decision he wants. So I think that he has healed a little bit. I think the Boston fan base has healed a little bit, seeing where they've been the past few seasons since Kyrie decided to go down to Brooklyn. And now obviously he's in Dallas. But with both of those sides healing a little bit, I think maybe it'll be a little bit less like vitriol and kind of like disdain during these games. But I know for a fact they're still going to boo him because they want to try to affect him on the court. There's no question about that. That's what the Boston fans want to do. They want to try to help the team win. So there's no doubt he's going to get booed. It's going to be loud. It's going to be crazy. But everyone else on the Mavs is going to get booed as well because this fan base wants nothing more than to, if they can just give the Celtics a little bit of a boost in any factor of the game, they're going to try to do it. And so I would expect that that's going to happen in games 1 and 2 when the Dallas Mavericks and Kyrie Irving come to town.
Kyrie Irving talking about what this finals appearance means to him as he gets ready to take on the Boston Celtics.
Feels great, man. Definitely don't take this moment for granted because of how hard we had to work to get here, and we had to earn our spot into the NBA Finals. And we had to go against some great opponents, OKC, Clippers, Wolves, and I feel like they got us better as a team. They really challenged us on the defensive end, made us focus in, and I thank every single one of them, like I did the previous 2 series, for making me better. And it has been 7 long years, but it's also felt like the right amount of time, in order to reward myself, be in the locker room with my teammates and enjoying it. A long time coming, so we are going to enjoy this, but we obviously know this is just a pit stop in the journey, and we got to get ready for that court turning gold, as I like to say. The shoes turn gold, the jerseys turn gold, and as a kid, that's what you dream of getting to, is the finals and being able to play against the best of the best with the whole world watching.
So Kyrie, of course, trying to keep Boston from reaching their pot of gold, if you will, when it comes to the Larry O'Brien Trophy.
I see what you did there.
I see what I did there, exactly, as this series unfolds for sure. And we've talked about with Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, the superstars for the Celtics. Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving represent the superstars for the Dallas Mavericks, obviously. What do you think from Boston's standpoint they're looking to do to try and get after these two who have such a dramatic effect on the way that the Mavericks play, especially Luka Doncic, with being the scoring champion this year and doing so many things to help the Mavericks be able to win. How are the Celtics approaching attacking, starting with Luka Doncic in this series?
Yeah, first and foremost, I got just one more thing on Kyrie, and it's great watching that piece and just watching from afar, not only this season, but in particularly this playoff run. He just seems like he's in such a great mental place, and I'm really happy for him that he is there because it hadn't seemed that way when they were in Brooklyn and during his final season here in Boston. It didn't seem like he was in a great mental place, and it really does feel good to be able to watch and see him in that space now, and I'm really happy for him. With regard to the way that the Celtics are going to attack and try to defend him and Luka Doncic, I think the Celtics know as well as anyone, especially having that experience of playing against Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and these guys a couple years ago, you're not going to stop the best players in the world. You can only hope to make life as difficult as possible. And Joe Mazzulla touched on this the other day during one of his media sessions, that the Celtics aren't necessarily going to try to stop Luka Doncic or really even limit him. They're going to just defend him as well as they can. And I think they're going to probably emphasize trying to take away everything else on the court. Luka is shooting 43.4%, 44%, something like that from the field throughout this playoff run. I think obviously his overall numbers are enormous because he impacts the game at such a high level. But I think if the Celtics can keep him to around those numbers, they would live with whatever the point total is, the assist total, all that stuff, because he's so great. And Kyrie, same thing with Kyrie Irving. They're so great. You're not going to be able to stop them. They're going to get theirs. That's why they're here. That's why they have the reputation that they have. That's why the Celtics traded for Kyrie a handful of years ago, because for this exact reason, because he can take over a playoff game in a playoff series. So I think the Celtics just understand, and they've got their heads wrapped around the fact that these two guys are so great that they are going to get theirs no matter what. All we can do is try to make life as difficult as possible on them as they get theirs, and then try to limit everything that happens around them with the rest of the guys who are on the court. So I think that's how they're going to attack it. I don't think they're going to be, sending 2- and 3-person traps at Luka Doncic out at half court trying to get the ball out of his hands, because when you do that with players that are of the caliber and IQ of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, they're going to pick you apart. They're going to pick you apart. It's not going to result in positive result. And it's going to give those other guys on the court even more of an ability for them to bring their mental state up and their confidence up throughout a series. So back to that original point, I just really feel like the Celtics are going to defend those two guys as best as they can with one, maybe 2 defenders at times, and they'll live with the results and try to take away everyone else.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one of my favorite matchups that I'm looking forward to in this series, with Kyrie Irving, of course, offensively for the Mavericks, but Drew Holiday, one of the best defensive guards in the league, and with Boston bringing him there for situations like this to go up against some of the best, scorers in the league. What do you think about that matchup and Drew Holiday and what he's been able to bring to this team, not just from a leadership standpoint, but also how well defensively and what he's going to mean to this team, especially, I would imagine, with the primary assignment dealing with Kyrie Irving, and a lot of times him and Derek White, I'm sure, sharing some of that responsibility in this series here.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the most interesting things of when that ball gets thrown up for the jump ball for game 1. I can't wait to see who matches up with who, and in particular when the Celtics are on the defensive side of the court. Because what Brad Stevens has built here with this roster is a bunch of interchangeable pieces. Any of them can basically defend any of them on the other side of the ball, with the exception, obviously, you don't want one of your smaller guards guarding a 7-foot center who is a rim roller and able to throw down alley-oops and whatnot, and Derek Lively and Gafford and whatnot. But everyone else is interchangeable. So I'm really curious to see what Joe Mazzulla decides in terms of who is going to be the primary defender on Luka Doncic, who is going to be the primary defender on Kyrie Irving. I don't know the answers to those questions. I think all of this, and one thing that I do think is being overlooked a little bit here, everyone's talking about Derek White and Drew Holiday, and obviously you brought them up in particular with defending Kyrie Irving, but one thing people aren't talking about is that Jaylen Brown certainly could have made an all-NBA team this season, an all-defensive team this season. He has been really, really, really good defensively. He's a big, strong guy. I would not be surprised if he starts out being the primary defender on Luka Doncic, or it could be Drew Holiday. And then Jayson Tatum is an excellent defender as well. Big, strong guy with a bunch of length and whatnot. So I have no idea who Joe Mazzulla is going to decide to assign to each of those guys. It's going to be very interesting. But the one thing I would expect is that because the Celtics, outside of Kristaps Porzingis, are so interchangeable, as I spoke about, it's probably going to be a bunch of every one of those players is going to be switching onto both Kyrie and Luka throughout the series. Kind of like whatever the action dictates, as long as it's not dictating. You know, we already saw what happened to Rudy Gobert when he got isolated on Luka Doncic. I think the Celtics will probably try to stay away from Kristaps Porzingis being isolated on either of those guys. It's going to happen from time to time, but those other four defenders are the guys who I think are going to be totally interchangeable between Luka and Kyrie.
And you brought up Joe Mazzulla because I'm fascinated with him because the amount of success
many people are.
Yes, yes, and he provides to be an interesting guy when you listen to him speak, and the way that he thinks about the game and the way that he approaches the game. It's very different than what we see traditionally as far as the game is concerned. But for him at 35 years of age in the NBA Finals, once again, what has he brought to this organization in terms of his philosophy, the way that he approaches the game, that's allowed him to be as successful and connect with this team the way that he has throughout his tenure so far there?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind as you ask that question is like emotional stability. And not to say that that wasn't here before, but I think it's been such an emphasis for him to keep both himself and his staff and the players around them emotionally stable from game one, and really before that in training camp, starting in training camp, all the way through 82 games and throughout the postseason run. The one thing that he was preaching to this team heading into the postseason, he preached it to us as well. Sorry, I've got a delivery. There's my dog barking in the background. But the one thing that he had been preaching both publicly and privately to the players heading into the postseason is we cannot have expectations. And what he means by that is if you go into a series like against the 8th seed in the East or against a team that's missing one of its better players and you expect to beat them and you expect to beat them in a certain way, well, when things don't go as you expect upstairs going into that series, that can start to become a psychological barrier for you. And I think that did happen a little bit in the prior couple seasons for the Celtics. Like when they played against Miami and went down 3-0, like that was a psychological thing that they had to go through right there.
Sure.
But they bounced back. Obviously, they didn't win the series. But heading into this season, when Joe Mazzulla had an entire offseason to actually prepare for how he wanted to coach this team, both on the court and mentally and off the court, that's one thing that he preached from the very start. Let's be emotionally stable. Let's not have expectations so that if things don't go as maybe all the other people on the outside expect it to go, we are still calm, cool, and collected, and we're able to bounce back. And really, that's been the case all season long. As you know, Kevin, I'm sure that when you look through everything the Celtics have accomplished this season, they have not lost more than 2 straight games. We are 96 games into the season. They have not lost more than 2 straight games all season long. So this team doesn't let things snowball, right, from game to game. They don't let things snowball within a game where in prior seasons, maybe a 5-minute bad stretch turns into a quarter and a half of bad play or poor play. Doesn't happen this season. Now it's a few minutes and it stops. And if they lose one game, it doesn't roll into the next one. It stops. That's because of emotional stability. And that's one thing that Joe has been coaching and preaching after his finally got his first offseason to put together a plan. He's been preaching it since day one, and I feel like it's worked.
Yeah, this team doesn't seem to get too high or too low, win or lose. And that's something that you need, especially riding the emotional roller coaster that is the NBA postseason. And the Celtics have navigated tremendously to get themselves in this position. Last couple of things before we get out of here, Mark, because, we talk about, strategy and what this team could do potentially against the Mavericks. What's an X factor for you that maybe isn't being talked about that needs to be discussed a little bit more that's going to play a major part in this series for the Celtics based on the way that they want to approach this series?
Well, what's interesting to me is that I always look at playoff series as like the guys are the guys who are going to win a series. We always see that it typically boils down to how well do each player's superstars play. That's how I usually look at things. However, going into this series, I feel like the Celtics are 12-2 during this postseason to advance to the finals. Their bench has not played all too well, and I think they'd be the first to admit that. When you look at Peyton Pritchard, when you look at Sam Hauser, and Al Horford obviously was starting, things that lineup was a little bit shortened. But I think getting those guys back on track is going to be a huge emphasis for this team, because when Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard are both shooting, and by the way, Pritchard is shooting 45% from three during the postseason, the numbers just haven't necessarily been there in bulk. But when you get guys like that coming off the bench who are like snipers from long range, Sam Hauser is one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA. I would put my name on it anywhere. But he hasn't looked like it the last couple of rounds, right? So getting him back on track, getting Peyton Pritchard more shot attempts, and then Al Horford likely, I don't know what the case is going to be, but likely sliding back into a reserve role with Kristaps Porzingis likely coming back. I think that lengthens Boston's roster, and really the Celtics have got to emphasize being able to get those guys rolling, because when they are rolling, when you've got 8 deep, including 3 guys and including Al Horford, 3 guys coming off the bench who can all shoot 40% from 3, when you've got guys like Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Derek White and Drew Holiday who can break down a defense and be dynamic players with the ball in their hands, like that's when the Celtics become like borderline impossible to defend, because you got to help them, right? You got to help the defender when one of those guys takes the ball off the dribble, and that leaves open a sniper from long range for 3 points instead of 2, which is the whole math equation we've been talking about throughout this podcast. So, in my opinion, the thing that people are not talking enough about is that bench from the Celtics and being able to get those guys a lot of good looks and get them to make those looks from long distance.
You mentioned Horford. Horford turning 38 years old. So the Mavericks trying to ruin not only his birthday week, if you will, in terms of winning a championship, but obviously he's been a veteran in this league. Has been great. He was great in the series, obviously against the Pacers. Really an X factor for them, especially with his ability to stretch the floor from the 3-point line.
By the way, X factor: the Celtics taking care of business and ending that series against Indiana as quickly as possible. I can't tell you how enormous that is for Al Horford. Being able to get these 9 days off and recover physically for him, I think, is a huge thing, because he had started to hit a little bit of a wall there in the last series. I think at one point he missed 12 straight threes. Then he bounced back with a huge game. I guess it was game 2 or game 3 against Indiana. But I think getting these 9 days off was huge for him and being able to feel good about himself physically going into the series.
So from you, Mark, the Celtics win this series because they do what, or they lose this series because they don't do what?
I think they win the series because they defend at a high level and make life difficult for everyone across the board, including Luka and Kyrie, while shooting well from 3-point range. If the Celtics defend well and make shots from 3, the numbers say they're pretty impossible to beat, especially 4 times out of 7. Now, the Celtics lose this series, in my opinion, if they just have a whole entire series of just not being able to shoot the ball well. And it happens, right? Like we've seen it happen at times. You see it in college in the tournament. You see it in the pros during the postseason. The difference is that it's 7-game series here. So it's much more difficult to keep a team who is very good at shooting the ball from 3-point range cold for an entire series. But if that happens, I think that it's going to be tough sledding for the Celtics. So I hope that both teams play well and this goes 6 or 7 games and it's like close games throughout, because we would remember this one forever with these big names on both sides, especially 3 of the 4 big names. When we talk about the top 2 from each team going for their first title, like this should be awesome. And I can't wait to watch it unfold.
It should be a tremendous series. As you mentioned, a lot of star power on both sides. 2 of the best teams that really have been kind of in the periphery, kind of circling each other throughout the second half of the year. Boston, the best team all season long, but really in the second half as well. The Mavericks, best team in the West, finishing their last 33 games, 24-9. So in a way, these 2 teams have kind of been running towards each other, but just on opposite sides. And now they're meeting, of course, now in the NBA Finals. Mark, tell the folks so they can find you and your coverage that you're going to be having during the NBA Finals here.
Yeah, awesome. So on X, you can find me at Marc_D'Amico. That's DAMICO. On Instagram, it's Marc D'Amico NBA. So I'll obviously be plugged in on all of the Celtics side of things throughout this finals run. And if you are searching for it, I know you're all Mavs fans, but if you want to see what's happening on the other side, feel free to give me a follow, send me a message. I'd be happy to message back and make some new friends here as we go through this finals run.
Well, definitely here for sure. I appreciate you taking the time with me. There's tremendous stuff. Boston has had an incredible year, and we're looking forward to a tremendous NBA Finals. So I appreciate your time and joining me here on the Inside the Mavs podcast, Mark.
No doubt. Thank you, Kevin.
That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, thank you to Celtics Insider Marc D'Amico for joining me here on today's episode. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And you can make sure you like and comment on the video as well. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. This has been Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura.